Okay, when a fossil's not from Noah's flood, let's take you to the Victorian gold fields. Now, remember I said there was an old gold miner down there who told me, look for carbon, black stuff in the rocks, fossils in the rocks. And we've even got a famous example of a fossil that's coated in gold. Great connection. No one's quite sure why. Now, what are you looking at? Well, you've got a top view of a mine dump, because after miners started to crush the rocks from the quartz veins, not scavenge for it in the streams, they would crush the quartz rocks and they would end up getting rid of the dusty powder, etc., that had been treated with arsenic and you name it, all these dangerous things to actually get the gold out. Mercury remnants and that are all full through here. Okay, now you see where the red arrow just popped up? That's where the old bund or the old wall was, and that this was in a little valley, and they were aiming just to get rid of their overflow waste dump and put their own little wall in, and there was a sullage pit right past that where the excess water would leak. Now, there is all that's left of the bund wall. See that hardened block in the middle? See my colleague's feet on the left-hand side? Australians look good in their boots, don't they? Particularly if they wear white clothes on a field trip. I can't say I didn't warn him, but in reality, there's yours truly. Not in anything really clean, and dressed up with a good Aussie hat, and inside the bund wall back towards where the mine dump was pumped from. Yes, what they do would be crush the gold, crush the ore, crush the rocks, and then the remnants that they didn't want, gold could be harvested either because it was too heavy or it would dissolve in the mercury or things like that, and they would pump the residue after it had been further treated out into this walled enclosure. Okay, good to have colleagues. By the way, this is a naturally formed from rain and storms since the bund wall broke down, and so it's all eroded out, and you can get inside what was behind it. Another one of my colleagues. By the way, thank you, colleagues, because I love saying, dig here, dig that, get that out for me. Really useful. Age does come with a few benefits. Can you see what he's doing there? Excavating one of the walls. And look at the layers. Now, here's what we know about this process. The factory where they crushed all this was up the other end on the left-hand side of the screen, and they would pump the stuff into it. And it's quite a decent sized bund, as you saw from the global map view from satellites. And yet it all ended up in lovely, neat layers. And that will become very significant. Yes, we were getting specimens for our museum. So we're extracting them, we are trimming them, we are picking them up. And I'll guarantee you don't have any other museums on the planet where they've actually dug the layers out intact. All right, so we put it in our nice carry bag, a plastic one. We've coated it already with transparent glue to hold the outside together. And because it's been underneath the ground, it's moist. So we have to keep the moisture intact, or it'll simply just go to powder like the edge of the wall has. Actually, what's interesting is there are streak marks and areas that look like, well, something scoured across the top. And quite surprisingly, no, and actually it's not surprising, these scratch marks, streak marks, there's where I found the specimen on the right-hand side. There's where it was pumped in on the left-hand side. So don't be surprised, there's evidence of the water flow on each bed. And the water flow is over the top and through the layers. Well, there's where we took that first specimen from. Let's have a look at doing some further work, because here's where we're going for our second test. Remember, we're digging ones in an artificial environment, and yet the water's been pumped in from the arrow on the left, and by the time it's got down to the bund wall where you can see some bits remaining with big cavities in it, it's actually in nice, neat layers. Well, here we are at the top, just where the stuff was flowing in. And I'm sure even you can see the layers in this glue-coated block with a hammer on top. You see, when we get close up, yes, those geological hammers make sure they're tough, because we still found some nice little quartz bits in here. And that's what the guys with their mine, the metal detectors are looking for, bits that made it through the system that actually still have gold in it. And look, layer upon layer upon layer. At the front end, where we started, there was layer upon layer up against the bund wall. At the other end, where it was pumped in, it was already in layers before it got 10 feet from the pipe. Quite amazing. But actually, what Steno would say, the ones at the bottom got there first and the ones at the top got there last. But in reality, this thing filled up sideways, and it's always ignored in any of your geology courses. So in 2024, because I was down there doing number 1 in 2023, and the other guys started doing number 2 in 2024. And you say, why am I bothering telling you that? Well, you can see where the water's coming. You can see the V-shaped deposit, certainly just like a delta, etc. And it's behaving like the first man saw the deltas in Venice behave. It's not forming layers one on top of each other. It's forming the layers sideways from left of the picture to right. Why am I bothering to tell you it's 2024? Because we've got the 1924 map. So this is over 100 years old. I say over because in reality, there's what it looks like when you get close up. There's an excavation. The whole wall has fallen down. You can see the layer upon layer. There's the two guys who are collecting things for me. Yes, it was sort of hot day. We have long sleeves, not to keep us warm, but to keep the burning sun out. Now, we found some fossils. But what's interesting is we took advantage of a biblical rule from Exodus, authored by Moses, of course, because of God's instruction. And in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, God says you'll work for 6 days and you'll rest on the 7th. Now, even though most of the world doesn't do that anymore, most of the West actually started that way. There was a time in Australia when you could not find a shop open on Sunday except where you could buy fresh milk because there was no milk deliveries and no refrigerators. You will not find history in America. In fact, you'll even find rules about Sunday laws where they weren't allowed to work. And these mines were shut down on Sundays. Okay. Oh, do you see what's in the top of that rock? There's fossil footprints. We made a prediction when we started digging this up that because they rested on the 7th day, one day water wasn't pumped in. So one day it was still on the top of the pond and any animal or whatever had a chance to get in the pond. When did the gold rush occur here? A lady found it. Mrs. Margaret Kennedy, 1851, was doing her washing in the creek. And she noticed these lovely gold little nuggets, bless her heart. And she and a friend lady actually are famous for finding this, but they soon ran out of the alluvial gold. But this pit has come purely after they learned to dig up deeper and get the gold ore out of the quartz, crush the rest and pump it. The maximum age of these fossils is 150 years from the start of the crushing. They didn't start crushing until the 1870s and 1880s, and now it's 2024. But there's also plants in it. And surprise, surprise, the long stem plants point towards the end where the pumping is coming from. So there's no doubt about that these plants were washed in. These footprints occurred when it was still enough, but then they were buried really fast, so you can even see the structure on the stems before the whole lot is crushed. But one thing we do know, not only do you need rapid burial to form fossils, that's why you'll find them around the coal mines in the Philippines if you're brave enough to get inside. You'll find them in the sewer channels or the piping channels in Manila. Rapid burial, it needs to be deep. Why? Particularly to keep oxygen out. Well, on one day when this was first at the top of the pile, oxygen had access to it, but the bugs wouldn't have been there at all. Why? Try arsenic, try mercury, try all the residual minerals they were using, and these still have health warnings on them, right? You don't want to eat this stuff to get the clay content out. When you look at this stuff here, it's an ideal anaerobic situation to preserve the fossils really quickly. Now, post-flood fossils, and I'll finish with this section because it's really important. When you look at Noah's flood fossils, you have to remember several things. Before Noah's flood, no rain. Bible's emphatic. Before Noah's flood, no floods. Therefore, no catastrophic destruction of the land, whether it be trees or animals or plants. Just the bones, maybe from death, would lie around. So no real fossil possibility. Noah's flood comes, 40 days and 40 nights of rain, and if you've got it only in the Middle East, there won't be fossils anywhere except the Middle East. Sorry, biologus, but you deserve it. When you have a look at the fossils, it's easy to tell the ones that came post-flood, because some of them we've watched form. But if you want to tell Noah's flood, well, here's a volcano, Mount St. Helens. That's what it looked like the first time I saw it. I went there over several decades before it blew up. And what's interesting is this is a post-flood event. It's happened in my lifetime. But Noah's flood starts with the fountains of the deep, the waters below, an awful lot of volcanic activity, an awful lot of sudden volcanic activity, and then the water reaches its limit after 40 days and 40 nights, and that's the rain rather, but then it keeps rising for another 110 days. This means you have a multi-level, a multi-stage flood. Mount St. Helens was pretty impressive. I mean, look, that was the last time I saw it whole. Look at this. There's the famous photos, not taken by me, but one of my colleagues actually was involved in the ICR study that sent them to look at the results of Mount St. Helens, and I went and did the same thing afterwards. Look at that. Aren't you glad the pilot who took that, or his friend who took that, the plane was going the other direction? Otherwise, we wouldn't have these shots. Great stuff. How's that for? I mean, would you love to have seen that coming towards you? The people still recount how they could see it, but they couldn't hear it. That's because the ash cloud was traveling faster than the speed of sound, like a jet plane, quite literally. And there's the result. Yes, I've been to Mount St. Helens, and I took these pictures here. What you'll find is we flew over again in a small plane. This is definitely happening after the flood, but you know what was interesting? The water was still coming out of that central core. The water was still pouring out because one of the biggest factors in the volcanic eruption was water. The more water that comes out, the more violent the eruption. Basic Geology 101. If there's very little water, it'll do what happens in Hawaii, creep down the hill, slowly eat the villages that it's doing at the moment, destroy your house while you stand there watching it and taking a video. Not Mount St. Helens. You see flying over the lip. I'll tell you what, my stomach almost came out of my mouth sometimes. Can you see the Spirit Lakes in the far north of the picture there? Yeah, we're just about to go over the surface of this, and the destruction was incredible. The wave washed up the hill and down the hill. Yes, massive volcanic shock hit these lakes quite a distance away, destroyed all the trees by stripping of their branches and leaves, and then washed the trees up the mountain. Okay, catastrophe, but only on a small scale. I flew over it quite a few times after that, and bit by bit, the lake emptied until finally there's just bits and pieces left floating around Mount St. Helens Spirit Lake. There's what it was one year. You can see the trees standing up vertically. There's one of my colleagues actually looking at the trees there. The trees are standing up vertically. They're not sitting on the base of the lake at all. They scuba dived, and thanks to the ICR paying for these sort of experiments and observations, it was already jet black carbonized stuff from the bottom. Yep, I took that picture there. The logs had actually lost their bark by now. The bark was now separate on the bottom. They were floating like this. But don't be surprised. There's one of the famous diagrams from their study. Yep, I've actually found that to be true at any time, whether you've got a volcanic eruption or whether you've got a flood or whatever, you'd expect to find trees standing upright. You see, here's a unflooded dam in Kentucky. Why did I go back there and do all this study? Well, there's what I noticed that the sticks were doing. All trees, all sticks, all grasses, all weeds will actually get buried vertically and sink. They will drown vertically, sink to the bottom, standing vertically. And if the ash is there or there's more stuff coming in, they will be buried vertically and form polystrate trees. But this lake is only a small one in Kentucky. Mount St. Helens didn't cover even the whole of Washington. Oh, yes, some of the ash got to Nova Scotia, because I think that was where I was when the actual explosion occurred. Look at that. The vertical ones, the 45-degree ones, and the ones that are floating horizontally. Now, that's why you find inclined logs on a big scale in the coalfields of Scotland, in the Newcastle coalfields, in the Carboniferous. They're characterized by fossils that were like that, but then they were buried before they fell over, or they were buried while they were still standing up, or they were buried while they were still horizontal. So don't look for this on a little scale. It's not the actual sort of fossil that will get you. It's the scale of the beds that it's in. Like here am I walking down Tattle River, not long after the eruption has sort of subsided. And do you see the fossil tree over there, the one that's buried before the new trees have started growing? Let's have a look at the ones that have been washed out. Vertical logs in the ash, vertical logs now exposed by the ash being washed away, vertical logs with roots on, and the roots didn't grow there. Yeah, you might find a whole root system, but can I encourage you, go to the ends and you'll find they're broken off. That's how you tell whether it's a fossil forest or whether it actually is a dump. Trees often get ripped up by their roots and they take the whole root system with them. But here's the important part. Do you see the fossil I spotted? Layer upon layer. There's some great articles around on how quickly Mount St. Helens formed layers, and nobody seems to worry about the fact that the layers were all forming at once. This is catastrophic, but air behaves as water. They're both liquids. And one of the trees, look at it. There it is. It's vertical and it's petrified. Now you too can go to Wikipedia or Google and hunt down the dates at which these eruptions occurred. Well, what's more important is how big these eruptions are. And Mount St. Helens has a fairly regular system of eruptions. And so don't be surprised in some of the previous eruptions. What's happening now to the trees in the lake there happened in the past, but it was still not on a bigger scale at all. Some of the eruptions were bigger than the last one, but I'll tell you what, none of them covered a global basis. So as we look at Noah's flood, all right, let me make one last comment on this before we get you to think carefully about the dispersion of things after Noah's flood and give you some questions. I have a very important fossil here. It's a jaw. It's actually quite heavy, but I got it out of a limestone caving system, and it's a dingo. It just looks like the dingoes that live here today. And there's almost no dispute now. These dingoes came to Australia 4,000 or so years ago, and the Aborigines who come from India and the dingoes who come from India. I mentioned this because yesterday was Australia Day, or as some people like to say, Invasion Day. They're the people who want to reject the Christian system at all, and they want to go back to the Aboriginals, and their claim is, we own the land because we've always been here and always will be. Can I tell you something? That's a biologos heresy. They haven't always been here. They're at the Tower of Babel. And they got to the Tower of Babel because they got off Noah's flood. And using fossils as the evidence that the world is so old and there never was a Noah's flood is what biologos is doing to the peace that we had in Australia. You're encouraging the natives to think they own the land because they've always been here. Well, I don't really want to be political, but I hate to remind every one of us that I don't even own the property that I'm living on. God does. And it's his to give to whoever he wishes to. But can I encourage you, in all of these issues, they're not just simple issues about how big the flood was. They're about who God is. He is the judge, and you have to deal with him as creator, him as the owner of the planet, and him as the one who sent a flood which covered all the highest hills under the whole heavens,